There we go. All right. Hey, I'm going to email everybody real quick. So 1 second, because the last stream I made had messed up options, and so I had to fix that. So let me go ahead and send them the link. Click. All right. Actions, email. Well, at least I caught this now. Because if I didn't catch this now, I'd mess up my next class too. But that's all my fault.
Are we going to be using this here?
That's the thing. We're so low on them that I'm not quite sure how it's going to work out. So. My poor Chromebook. It doesn't like doing all these things at once.
They don't make it.
Yeah, they're missing a lot of things. Disregard the origin. Yeah, original. All right. Hopefully everyone will see that and it'll get fixed up. Hey, so let's go ahead and begin. So once again, the camera's not going to be on you. So, well, then like when you go home, put the camera on yourself with your little cell phone telephone and just smile and wink at it. All right, so
I'm trying to move my chair in front of the camera.
well, there's a lot of what ifs. All right, so hey, if you're joining us through the live stream, we've just instructed our in-person students on how we do our warm-ups. That's going to work a little differently for you, so don't worry about that right now. We're going to get another daily grade format for you through Google Classroom. We're going to do this daily at 10:25. I had a technical hiccup. Whenever I set up the live stream, it was asking for software I didn't have, so I had to make sure to use the webcam and the microphone. If you have a question, just type it in the comments, and I'll do the best I can. So today's warm-ups from Boethius. Boethius is known as like the last classical philosopher, right? So when we talk about classical, we're talking about Greeks and Romans. He was around during what people generally refer to the fall of the Roman Empire. It's when Rome essentially transferred from being ruled by emperors and somewhat its senators to a time when really it was ruled by kings, right? So Boethius, he was an early Christian. So at this time, Christianity wasn't illegal anymore. But what he did is he often criticized politics. And because of that, you're going to put the math homework up for now. All right. So because of that, he wound up being put into prison. And I think he was eventually stoned to death. So, and he wrote a book while he was in prison before he was stoned to death called Consolation of Philosophy. And in that book, he outlined a lot of things about early Christian thoughts and some what was remaining of classical philosophy regarding Stoic influence. So you'll probably learned a little bit about that in Miss Martinez's class last year, about the Stoics, like Marcus Aurelius, people like that. No. Dead eyes. Okay, but in case, so he wrote, in other living creatures, the ignorance of themselves is nature, but men it is vice. So what does that mean to you? Like, what did you say? I need somebody's brave. Like, yeah, show me. What?
Well, I didn't really know, but I tried my best.
Uh-huh.
It said men are ignorant because they lack virtue.
Yeah, if you're like, because then you're like, other living creatures. What's another living creature? An animal, like a dog. So they're saying dogs aren't really self-aware. It's like they're in the Matrix and they didn't take the red pill. They're still living in the VR world. So that's the animals. But people, if you're living if you're not living in virtue, you're kind of dumb. And you're like an animal, is what he was saying. And you're living a life of self-destruction and vice. So yeah. Anybody else? Yeah.
I said, creatures are made to be good, that is their nature, but men choose to be evil.
That's right. Yeah, because like the thing is, can an animal be evil? It could be.
It can be vicious.
It can be vicious. It can be cruel. But there's usually a reason behind it, right? But yeah, people can think out choices. We call that you can call it free will. Some people call it I forgot the word. But yeah, free will is a good way to put it. So yeah, people can have all the things that they need in life given to them, but they could still be bad, right? They can still make that choice. So he's making the case here that if you do not know yourself, because if you remember last year, that was one of those things that was for Greeks, the ancient Greeks. Remember, they had Greek mythology, the Hellenistic cult, it was called Kelp. And outside the Temple of Delphi, it said, "Know thyself." And remember, like Socrates quoted that when he was put on trial and all that stuff. So you got to know yourself. So even not only ancient Greeks, but even like early Christians, they're like, you got to know yourself. You know? And part of that is like the ancient saying, "Memento mori," remember death. And if you remember death, you remember you're immortal. If you remember you are immortal, you remember that the world and the life you have has to count. All right, so that's your warm up. So you go ahead and put that up. We're going to pull out another one tomorrow. It's going to be much shorter because I'm going to get the video to work faster next time. And it's going to be scheduled at 10:25 tomorrow. So that gives y'all time to get adjusted and get things started and them to get themselves ready and me to get things ready without messing it up. And then we get started. All right, so the things we're going to discuss today is first off this. So when you enter the room, y'all are doing a good job. And like I said, stay off the paint, go down the aisles. Trash is here. If you're going to snack in here, because, I mean, if you eat lunch in there, why not snack? Make sure you clean up crumbs and trash and stuff like that. Even if it's not yours, make sure you pick it up. We do need to start wiping down a little more, but we'll see about that later. So, yeah, if you get within 6 feet of somebody, you're supposed to wear a mask. But otherwise, we're spread out well enough in our desks the way we're spread them out. So I use the projector generally for the warm-ups and for images that have to do with the lecture. Our lecture is guided by the textbook. I ask you to read what we're going to discuss the day before. So tomorrow, we're going to talk about chapters 1 and 2. They're only like a page each. So it says chapter, but really it's like not really a chapter. So I put the textbooks in PDF format under the materials in the Google Classroom. It's the same chapters and everything. So everybody has the textbook. And so even if you have to go home because you're quarantined, because you're around somebody who was exposed, you can still, and you forgot your book here, you don't have lockers, you can still go to Google Classroom and look up the book on PDF, right? So before we talk about the fall of Rome, which precedes what we're going to discuss in this course, let's talk a little bit about some tools that have to do with history, and then talk a little bit about European geography, right? So, all right, so chapters 1 and 2. I got 4 terms up here. I'm not going to test you on these terms, but I expect you to know what they mean. So, the first one is chronological. If we go down chronology, y'all remember the Greek myth Kronos, right? He was the Greek god of time, and time eats all of its own children. Remember?
Actually,
He was like even before. Yeah, he was. Yeah. So Chronos, time, logical. Like the study of. So this is a study of history using time and order, like order of events. I'm not terribly too big on dates, there will be some dates that I think are important. Like some of the dates regarding the Crusades will be important. The Battle of Hastings will be important. Discovery of America, stuff like that. There's a few. Martin Luther's 95 Theses. Like, those are big dates in European history that has to do with changes in us as well as far as our cultures go. So yeah, when we study history, there has to be a time format that it goes down. But there's another thing as well. It can have to do with categories, and this is what we call topographical. We call it topological. So this is study of history based on a feature. So you can have history based on things like history of religion. You have history of like women's history. You could even have environmental systems history. You could have history over wars. You could have history over the founding of nations. Like that's essentially what like a lot of middle school history is, right? It's like Texas history. Like how did Texas start, become a nation, and then a state? American history. How did America become a nation and then a global power? Stuff like that. So they can go into each other. When you're studying something like, I don't know, if you're studying something like the history of civil rights, you don't start at the year 2019 and then go backwards. No, you're going to go back and go forward, but you're going to stay within the area of civil rights. You're not going to all of a sudden start talking about something off topic, right? Same with chronological. You talk about topics as you're going down in chronology. A lot of our primary sources are actually chronological because usually, especially when you're talking about, they call the Middle Ages the Dark Ages sometimes because there was a lot of things that kind of fell to the wayside. It wasn't quite that bad for a lot of people in some ways, right? It was actually oddly enough, very spiritual time for people. And it was a time of a lot of peace, oddly enough. It might not sound like it, but a lot of it was. But it was a time where technology wasn't doing that great. Not that many people could read or write or have political rights and stuff like that. But like I said, not a lot of people could read or write. So a lot of what was written about history was something like super boring. They're called annals. And that's basically like, it's the year 794. There was a very cold winter, so many people died. The year 1795, it was a particularly warm winter, so many people died. It's just a list of something like just general that happened. It's like, well, some periods. Well, there's one author. He's actually an archaeologist. His name's, I think, Francis Ward Perkins, and he grew up. His father was an archaeologist, and he grew up on the archaeological camps in Europe, going around studying Roman archaeological sites. And then he grew up and did the same thing. He wrote a book called The Fall of Rome, and he was talking about in these excavation sites they found after the fall of Rome, people were burying all their gold because it didn't have any value because there was no more laws really. It was just bandits, just people like trying to live off the land. People's skeletons got smaller, and so did like cow skeletons. They got smaller. Why would that happen? How can do skeletons shrink? What does it mean? The future generations are
Weaker
why?
because they don't have enough nutrients.
Yeah, they're not eating. If you don't eat, you don't grow. It's true. It's true. You can't read. People are taller now than they were a couple of generations ago on average because we get more calories in, so our bodies can reach their potentials better. You look at places like Soviet Russia in the gulags, right? A gulag is essentially a work camp where the expectation is you're trying to work you until you die. So communists did that kind of thing. Well, sometimes these were co-ed camps, and so sometimes people had kids, and the kids were so malnourished, they were often very small, they were mentally retarded and stuff like that because they didn't have enough nutrition, right? So nutrition is very important. So medieval people, especially in the very hard times of the birth of the Middle Ages, like the 600s and stuff, it was a time where it was very, very hard on most people. So yeah, I mean, but to our next term, primary sources. So whenever you're talking about history, you have to make references to something. People aren't born with historical ideas. You have to have a source to get those ideas of history. And so a primary source is generally from somebody who lived through an event in that time period, or at least they're around it enough to know how to write on it. Like a primary source for us now could be something like a newspaper. For something back then, it could have been like a letter, an epistle. It could have been like a book. It could have been, it could even be like baptismal logs. Like a lot of times churches would write down the names of kids and grown-ups who were baptized in the Middle Ages, and that helps give historians an account how many people there actually were, because pretty much only churchmen and the kingsmen could really write back then, right? So today, primary sources expand to things like audio interviews and stuff like that, and videos. Yes, ma'am.
It says made by someone who was too in a bit.
How about that? That sound better? Yeah, all right. So yeah, like here's an example, like primary sources today, or kind of today, right? So during the Great Depression, there was a big movement to record the best they could and to write down interviews with people who were actual slaves before the Civil War, or Northern and Confederate soldiers, to try to get their accounts, because they're all dying off. They're old, right? They're trying to do the same thing today with people who lived, like, say, World War II. A lot of them are in their 90s, like their mid-90s. People don't live too far past their mid-90s. Most people don't really make it that far. So some historians are trying to get their accounts, like Holocaust survivors and stuff like that, before they're all gone, to try to ask questions maybe other people didn't ask, or to get another perspective, or things like that. That leads us to secondary sources, right? So like a secondary source is what most books are. Because like if a historian writes a book about something that happened in the Middle Ages, that's a secondary source. You weren't there, but you're trying to pull from other sources to get that idea together. I mean, we do it all the time. So that's pretty much the gist of it. Hey, I'm going to go ahead and pull up a map real quick so we can talk a little bit about what Europe looks like. And if you're at home, you can just pull up on the Googles a map of Europe if you want to keep along. I'm just going to talk a little bit about what makes it shape its shape and how it affects people. Give it a second. All right, so here's the thing about geography. So geography has to do with, it means writing of the earth, right? So graphical, geo. So and I have this map here. In Europe, generally speaking, we think of it as kind of like the land from here to the west there. And so we focused a lot last year on Greece and Italy. Well, Europe can also, for us Americans, can mean England, Scotland, and Ireland, right? Now, this map is not in English, it's Latin. So, But these are the old Roman provinces for the most part. So that you see Hispania there, Gallia, where in Gallia is where France and Germany will come up. So the Roman Empire, if you see those red lines, that's pretty much the boundaries of the Roman Empire. You have some in Africa down there, right above the Sahara Desert, which they call the Desert from Africana. You have some going up here, up to Saudi Arabia. See one there, going up there, all the way separating them from a lot of what we would today call the Baltic states or Eastern Europe. And you'll even see at the northern part of England, you had Hadrian's Wall separating England, which they called Britannia, that had Latin-speaking English people separated from the Picts. Today, they're the Scottish people. And Picts back then were like the Romans were scared to death of them because they'd go into battle and all they would wear is like blue body paint and they would charge them to death and they didn't care if people killed them. They were like really, really, really crazy warriors. And so the Romans were like, this is crazy. Why do we want to go up there? It's too cold. So they built a wall to keep them out. So, Andrew, man, head up. Sit up. There you go. Yeah, wheel yourself to do it. No. Up. No, go on, sit up for me, would you? Please. Pretty please. You want to stand up? You want to sit up? That's better. All right. So the thing is about this geography is there's parts of it that actually separates people. And so, like, here's the thing. I'll show you with the pointer. So one thing here, you see you have mountains here. This is the Alps. Very, very, very hard mountains to go through. Here you have another set of mountains called the Pyrenees. Kind of hard to get through. And so all of these people in the time of Rome learned Latin. So they have linguistic and cultural connections. They have roads that are connecting them, stuff like that. As the government and the military of Rome contract because of the fall of Rome, these people become more isolated. And so Latin here becomes Spanish. Latin here becomes French. Latin here becomes Italian. Latin here becomes languages like Romania. Latin here vanishes. It's replaced by Germanic languages that becomes German. Latin's going to mostly vanish here, but it is still going to influence the English language. And so you're going to see that the influences were there, but the cities are going to vanish. Like London, for example, it was a pretty big, bustling city founded by Roman soldiers. But in the collapse of Rome, it's mostly going to grow over wild. Even Rome itself, where you still had like the Pope and the Vatican and stuff like that. But it's mostly, that's when it's going to become ruins. Trees are going to start growing in the streets. There's going to be like deer and wild animals going all around the Roman Colosseum because nobody lives there. People generally move out of the cities because the cities are going to be targets for barbarian raiders. A lot of these people, we call them Germanic people. They come from generally around here, and they kind of move west. As they move west, some of them are violent, some of them aren't. A lot of them are really just looking for a place to live. But it was still pretty destructive to the people who already live there, right? Same thing happens in like in North America. Like Native American tribes were constantly warring with each other for territory and stuff like that, pushing each other out. Like in 7th grade, you probably learned that in Texas, the Apache were pretty fierce, but they got more fierce when another tribe called the Comanche were taking their land. And then so on and so forth. So like one tribe pushing out another. Pretty normal. Well, who was pushing them out were actually people related to the Mongolians, like Genghis Khan. And so it's just human migration. But yeah, just keep in mind that these people are becoming separated. They're becoming isolated. Really rich Romans that were called potentates. It means like strong man, right? Rich people, what they start doing is they own these big farms. You could think of them, they were called villas, but you could think of them as like big plantations. And so like poor people who had nowhere else to go would ask the owner of the villa to stay and work on their land. And as it goes on for generations, they eventually become serfs. And so a serf is somebody who's kind of like a slave in many ways, but kind of not. A serf is somebody who, we're going to find out later when we talk about feudalism, has to work for the owner of the land. They can't leave the land. They can't vote or anything like that. But they can't be bought and sold. And they're supposed to have a couple of days off to work on their own stuff. That's kind of not that much different from a slave. And so that was so you went from a time where people had generally more freedom under Rome to where they had servitude. Yeah. You go in there? Go in there. Space master. Yeah, thank you, sir. Good luck. All right, so causes the fall of Rome. Hey, what time is this class over?
11.
Okay, real quick. All right, so like last year we were talking about the time of the Caesars, and so Caesar is synonymous with an emperor, and so as time went on, the Republican form of government there became more and more of a facade. You could vote for a senator, but it didn't really matter because the emperor who had the army was in charge of everything. Well, there was a lot of changes going on though in Rome. As they got this big, like super huge back then, like it would take you your whole life to walk, like just ride a horse around. They couldn't control it. They couldn't even tax it that well. And so you started having problems where you started having invasions from different places. You had the Parthians, who were like the new Persians, going in, taking all this stuff. You had those Germanic people coming in from the north and the west, taking a lot of land there. Some people theorize that the only way that the Roman government could really keep enough cash to keep things going was by conquering their neighbors. Well, they didn't have any more neighbors to conquer. They took all of them. People in Russia back then were basically living in the Stone Ages. I mean, they didn't have any money. They couldn't move into Africa anymore because the desert was in the way. They couldn't move over here to the east because the Parthians were really tough. They're really tough. And there's the ocean. They didn't know about America. So they had reached their boundaries. They couldn't grow anymore. So all they could do was contract, some historians say. And their economy wasn't based on trade and growth. It wasn't like a modern economy. So if they weren't taking other people's stuff, they weren't good enough at building stuff. Now they actually did have factories, and they even had mail order catalogs and stuff like that. You could actually mail order pottery, art, and stuff like that, utensils and clothing from Rome, made in factories, and have them brought all the way to like England and stuff like that at its high point. And so another theory is that that as Rome became more Christian, it became less aggressive towards its neighbors. So it didn't want to conquer as much. So you can say there's another one. You start having something come up called just war doctrine, and that was made by a guy named Augustus of Hippo. He was a big Christian thinker, and he was like, you can't have a war with somebody just because you want to beat them up and take their stuff. It has to have a good reason, like you're defending yourself, or you're defending a friend, you're defending the innocent. It's like, otherwise you can't do that. And like there's another reason too, like some people say it just had too many invaders. Some said that what they did is they watered down the Roman culture by taking in Germanic people. and that Germans didn't want to live like Romans. They just kind of wanted to live off the Romans' lifestyle. So they still wanted to have their own religion, which was called Arianism then. They wanted to have their own languages. They wanted to have kings. They didn't want to have a senate, stuff like that. And I think there's any other reasons. Oh yeah, another is that their government grew so much and inflation grew so much that money was almost worthless. And the only way to make enough money to buy stuff was to work for the Roman government, work for the bureaucracies. You right, buddy? Okay. So, I mean, there's like a lot of reasons they say it kind of happened. But we're going to pick up with that after chapter 1 and 2. So, hey, I'm going to go ahead and end the live stream. If you have any questions or if there's trouble with the video, please go ahead and send me a message or an email. I sent the attachment in the email that shows you how to join my Remind. So whenever I give messages that pertain to all history students, I go through that. But if I need to just contact you or the class, I'm going to send you an email through Google Classroom. But we'll start again on time tomorrow because I know what was wrong this time. I'll talk to y'all later.
I noticed what's different about